Hello, everybody, and welcome to the G4A show. This is episode 103. I, of course, am Jordan, as always. And if you don't know, we have some new rotating hosts now. That a couple of them are going to be on once a month, and one of our other hosts is going to be on twice a month. And today I'm joined by the man, the myth, the legend, the Nintendo boy himself, MBZ. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fantastic, Jordan. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. This is kind of your first official episode as a co-host of this show. So how does
Yeah.
that feel?
No, it's good. It feels like a little bit full circle as we mentioned before. And when I popped onto episode 100 briefly, I was like episode 2, I think, originally of this
You were
show.
the forgotten episode.
Yes, no one will ever know what happened. I recorded it back in Edinburgh, back at my family's house. It was during the summer. I think it was during COVID,
And it was a
or
good
something.
episode as well.
Yeah, it was
we
great.
spoke
I
about a
enjoyed it.
lot of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. But
So,
no one will hear it again.
obviously, you're now going to be here once a month for kind of
Yes,
as long as we can fit this into our schedules.
totally. Yeah.
Um, and it will probably give you some space to talk about things that aren't Nintendo, because of course, for
Yes.
people
Yeah.
who don't know you, you have a Nintendo podcast, and I know that you also do non-Nintendo stuff for Patreons and
Yes. Yeah,
things
we
like
do.
that, but you focus on Nintendo mostly, right?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, that's what I grew up on. It's weird because my dad originally got me a PlayStation when I was younger, so that was my first console. But all of my friend group were into Nintendo stuff. I think mainly because like Pokemon was such a big thing, especially in the UK. That was like my first exposure to Nintendo stuff. So I always had Game Boys and stuff growing up, but I didn't get into the consoles until GameCube. That was my first console.
Oh,
And I
okay.
remember
Wow,
the birthday.
that's later than me.
Yeah. Because my friends
And
had N64s, but I remember my birthday that I got my GameCube. All my friends already had them, and so they came round and they brought like a bunch of
that's
GameCube games and controllers. And I was
that's
like,
actually that's strange because that's quite late for someone of your age. Do you
yeah,
know what I mean? You were
yeah,
older when
totally.
you got into games,
Yeah,
whereas
well,
most people
I
are
guess
kind
I
of
was.
quite young.
If you're talking about PlayStation, that was like when I was maybe 9, 10, 8,
Mm-hmm.
9, 10, and then GameCube would have come out what
Two,
2001,
2002,
2002,
yeah,
yeah.
something like
So
that.
I would have actually I would have been about 10. Yeah, I would have been about 10 actually. So yeah, I got it like the end of 2002, so maybe
And then
11 or 12.
Nintendo just gripped you forever,
Yeah,
basically.
exactly. Yeah, I think it was also I had gone around to friends' houses and I remember seeing Smash Brothers Melee for the first time and just being like, this is the greatest
Yeah.
thing I have ever seen. I must play this. I must own it. Also, being into Pokemon, I always wanted to play Pokemon Stadium on N64, but my dad had brought me a PlayStation, so I couldn't do it. So I was like, I would go to the
Oh,
McDonald's or the Burger King. There was a Burger King nearby us. You remember when they used to have like
yeah,
you could
when
go
they
and
put
play
the games.
N64? So that's what I did. Went there every time I went to Burger King.
Yeah.
I'd be like, no, mum, we can't go. I need to keep
Yeah,
playing
that
Pokemon
that
Stadium
was
here.
kind of my experience of hospitals growing up as well. Because
Oh,
I
okay. Yeah.
obviously having a disability, I was in and out of hospital quite a lot,
Right. Yeah.
and yeah, they just had video games
Yeah.
everywhere, basically in hospitals when I was
Totally.
younger. So that was fun.
Yeah.
Um,
But yeah, I
and
guess
then
I
and then
just kept
yeah,
being into Nintendo from there.
yeah. I mean that makes sense though because it's like for me, I played on the original PlayStation,
Hmm.
and I enjoyed some of those games, but at the time I was quite young. So then we also had an N64. We were quite fortunate in that it was me and two of my brothers,
Yeah.
and between the three of us, we kind of just made sure we had what we needed. If
Yeah.
that makes
Totally.
sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, so like one of the first games, and I always say it, and it will come up later on, I'm sure, but one of the first games that I remember playing is Ocarina of Time.
Yeah.
And what a place to start, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can't get much better than that. I obviously I never owned one, but I remember one of my friends had Ocarina of Time, and
Mm.
every time I went around to his house, we would play it, and it would be this very slow progress of
Yeah.
like we're just slowly figuring stuff out. I
Do you
remember
know
we
what
spent
though?
like
I
a
I
whole
love
day
that
doing
about
the
I love that about like the olden days of gaming when there
mhm.
wasn't online gaming or whatever, and you would go around to a friend's house maybe once a week, and you would play this game together, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And you'd make like no progress because we were trying to get into the castle town and it was nighttime and the Skulltullers were like running, or the skeletons, whatever they're called, that were running around trying to kill us, and we're like trying to hide in the lake to avoid them. And yeah, I remember a whole day just like trying, the stealth section to go through the gardens to get to Zelda.
Yeah.
We're just so bad. The AI just kept getting us and we just kept getting booted back to the start. So yeah, fun times.
And yeah, and it's like, one of the things that I think about is I think that your first console, or like, obviously you've gamed before, and like you said, you kind of started on PlayStation, but your first real console where you really get into gaming will always be a special one for you,
definitely.
right? And it's like, for me, I would say that first console where I really it was my console. Do you know what I mean? It was my console. I chose the games I wanted on it and whatever, and that was the Dreamcast for me.
Oh, very nice.
And I still think the Dreamcast is, obviously we all know what happened.
Yeah.
Essentially killed Sega, but actually what killed Sega was the piracy more than the system.
Yeah, that was
a problem.
Yeah.
But that library of games that they had on there in that short period of time have some of the best experiences that I remember, and one day we will do Sega's best games, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because that'll be an interesting one, and we can pick some from their history that, are very important.
Yeah, definitely.
But today we are, of course, going to talk about Nintendo's best games. So you're not getting away from Nintendo yet.
just staying exactly where I'm planted. So yeah.
But before that, as always, I think we should talk about what we've been playing recently.
For sure. Yeah.
And I'd like you to start, because you finally started playing something that I've been telling you to play.
Yeah.
For ages.
So I can't say a lot about it because I'm only probably 40 minutes in. I literally booted it up and I was like, is this a good decision to do this now? Live Alive is coming out. I'm going to be playing Xenoblade 3 soon. Like, am I going to really start a new JRPG? But I did. So I started Yakuza Like a Dragon. I have now played every Yakuza game up to this point in chronological order.
I love that. I love that.
I know them all. I guess I technically haven't played Zero because I watched Giant Bomb play through Zero years ago.
Okay.
So I know the story and I know all the side quests of Zero, but I haven't actually played it myself. Might be one of those things where once I finish Like a Dragon, I go back to the beginning and just play through Zero, just for fun.
You've played both Judgment games as well.
I have.
Right?
I played both Judgment games. Yeah. So it's now one of my favorite series. Like, it is phenomenal. It's so good. And Game Pass was amazing.
I was saying to you,
that got me into
I made the comment on Twitter that at some point on this show we need to rank those games.
Oh, 100%.
Because there's enough of them that we can just do a whole
there
episode.
Are so many. Oh, absolutely. I would love to do that. Yeah, for sure.
So we will do that. So look out for that. Maybe that's our next month episode when MBZ's on again in 4 weeks.
Exactly.
We'll start doing that, and then what we can do is update it when he finishes Like a Dragon.
Exactly. Yeah, see where it ranks in the list for sure. But already, I mean, the game looks fantastic. Like, it runs really nicely. I have a high refresh rate monitor, so running 120
what
frames.
Obviously, you're only just into it. What are your early impressions of the new protagonist?
Yeah, so I like his vibe so far. Definitely different to Kiryu, which is nice.
Very different, right?
Very different. I think one of the unique things I've noticed early on is in the combat system. I expected it to be very strictly turn-based, but there is a bit of a timed element to it of like, you do those punches, knock someone down, and if you're quick enough with the attack,
they've kind of put their own little spin on the turn-based. Like, I'm not as familiar with turn-based games as you, but it felt like to me they put their own little spin on the turn-based genre.
Yeah, it feels like a little bit of that stuff, like that kind of active idea of you knock someone down, and then if you're fast enough to hit the attack
because you'll also learn about, and I don't know if you have yet, but you'll also learn about blocking in the game.
Yes, I've done a little
parrying, bit of that. And if you can time that stuff as well, so there's a timed element to that. It then enables you to do things, right?
Yeah, and I hadn't heard about that going in, which is interesting, kind of discovering that. And it kind of reminds me of like some of Nintendo's RPGs. So like the Mario and Luigi series and Paper Mario, they are very much based around timed button presses for certain things. So this idea of like timing your press to defend is quite nice.
Obviously, I don't want to spoil the game for you because I know that you love the series and everything. But I made one of my friends, Steve, who's been on the show, and is a big Nintendo fan, weirdly. I made him play Like a Dragon, and he hasn't yet finished it. But
Okay.
the way he describes it is he kind of goes back and forth on whether he put it in his top 20 JRPGs of all time.
All right. Yeah.
But he also says it's probably one of the best first JRPGs he's ever played.
Okay.
In the sense of if
Yeah.
he was to recommend someone to get into the genre, it's one of the best at that.
Yeah, it's also a non-traditional setting for an RPG, right? Like you don't see
It's
RPGs.
very grounded, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's just taking the Yakuza world and like, oh, he's a big Dragon Quest fan, so in his brain he just sees all the battles as turn-based, which I love, right?
That. I love that.
I'm a huge Dragon Quest fan, and I love that idea that it's so they just reference it directly. They're not even like trying to make up like, oh, it's like Dragon adventure. Like they're not trying to like fake it or anything. They're like, no, we're just talking about Dragon Quest.
Yeah, they literally
if Square Enix want to sue us,
it.
whatever, you know, we're just gonna put it in there. Which is cool because it speaks.
And do you know what as well? I will say, and I'm not gonna tell you why, but I will say that it is my favorite Yakuza game.
Okay. Yeah.
And I am so surprised by that because I love how the other Yakuza games play.
Interesting.
And therefore, I was quite apprehensive going in, right?
Yeah. See, I don't like the combat necessarily. Like, I played most of the Yakuza games on easy. The only ones I played on normal.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, because I just didn't really get on with the combat. I was like, it's just a little. It just feels a bit stiff. Kiryu's just very tanky, like in the way he.
I mean, he is tanky.
He is. Yeah, he's a big beefy boy. But like, I also like lent into the power fantasy of it. Of like, Kiryu is supposed to be this like godlike figure, almost
like unstoppable, right?
Right. And so playing on easy almost leans into that narrative a bit as well. But also, like,
you know what? I like that stuff as well. Is like I get what you're saying about leaning into what the game is.
Yes.
And sometimes you do, like, being on easy makes that more possible, you know, like if this guy is meant to be as unstoppable as they treat him in the universe, then you should basically never be dying.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Almost breaks canon, doesn't it? So yeah, but the Judgment games actually have a fantastic combat system, which I really like. Like it's so much more fluid. Like Yagami can jump off walls. And
I do, of course, hope we don't know what's kind of going on with that series because of outside circumstances.
Yeah, all the actor stuff going on, which is a bit.
But I really hope we see some sort of continuation of it because I think it's quite clever to have the traditional Yakuza type of gameplay in those games and then change the newer ones to turn-based, because that obviously has translated quite well and people seem to really like a dragon. So
yeah, exactly. They love it. And so
I'm just hoping that you'll play it and finish it, and that might be like a good luck charm, and they'll then announce the new one.
Yeah, exactly. No, and just waiting for me to finish it finally, and then they'll do it. I think that team is very fast, right? Like they've put out games at a pretty rapid pace, obviously,
and also they've got an engine that looks great, right? So the actual games look great, and they have for years. So they don't really need to do too much to just carry on making them because the stuff is already there. Like if people haven't played the Yakuza games before, many of them are set in the same place and they might have one new area here and there throughout the games that you kind of visit. But the core setting of the game is always the same, right? So the shop layout is the same,
especially for the main city of Kamurocho. But I know Yokohama is a bigger deal in Like a Dragon, and I know that Yokohama location because they reused it for Lost Judgment. So I actually of like know it. So better
you
from
already know it, but you should have actually played Like a Dragon first.
Yeah, which is fine. I'm sure there's like some nods and references in there, but it's all right. But I'm interested to see where they go because obviously Nagoshi is no longer with Sega. He's kind of left. So yeah.
So I won't tell you which character, but I will say that a character from Lost Judgment that you saw in Lost Judgment is a pivotal character in Like a Dragon.
Interesting. Okay, cool. That's good to know. I'm looking forward to it.
It'll be interesting when you see that moment and you figure out who it is.
Okay.
Because it might not be who you think.
All right. Yeah. No, I'm gonna have to think about that one. But looking forward to playing more of that. And
have you been playing anything else?
Yeah, I've been bitten by the Fall Guys bug, weirdly.
Oh, okay. We need to play some of this then because I love it.
Yeah, it's fantastic, man. I really, really am enjoying it. I'm level 57 on the battle pass, so I've been playing quite a lot.
I'm level 72, I think.
Oh my god! All right, Jesus. Okay, I thought I played a lot of it.
The bad thing is I still haven't won yet.
Really?
I
Have you
still
not
haven't
one at all? Like
never won. So I
did you
played
play
it on. So I played it when it originally released.
Okay.
On PlayStation, and I never won. I came close a few times.
Okay,
I
yeah.
came like second a few times,
Yeah.
and it was just like, oh, there was even one time where I jumped for the crown and just forgot to hold on.
Oh no! Oh, gutting. It's really interesting because
it's such a fun game, right? To jump in and out of.
I've approached it as like, this is the battle royale where I'm like, people who are very good at like Apex Legends, they're like people who grew up on like Counter-Strike and stuff. They're just like ninjas with the mouse and keyboard.
Yeah.
That's how I feel playing Fall Guys. Cause I'm like, I grew up on platformers. Like I should be good at this. So every time I lose in Fall Guys, I'm like, that was your fault. You
and it's
up.
Weird, right? Because there is weird physics stuff, but actually the physics are good in the game to the point where you can figure out exactly where to stand to do this or do that. And and it's like on the lily pad levels and stuff like that. If you get really good at those levels, you can go through them in like less than 30 seconds.
Yeah, if you know the right routes, especially if you take some of the top routes around some of those kind of obstacle course levels. Obviously, a lot to contend with other players being around you and all that stuff.
Of course.
But,
and also where you actually start in the group of players, right?
It's such a massive deal. Like, I don't know what determines that, like what decides where you are, but it feels like you can really get screwed over by that type of positioning.
Absolutely.
Because if you're like right at the front, you don't have anyone to contend with, and you can kind of like make your own space.
The funny thing is,
easily.
though, you definitely can, but then there have also been times where I've had an advantage being at the back because other people get stuck and I just sort of run through.
Right. Or they like, it's like the doors where all the doors are fake and some of them you can get through. That one is helpful to stand back a bit because some people will just like go for it and then just stop. And you can get an advantage by like looking back and kind of finding the correct route through. Absolutely. But yeah, I found it really fun. I think the nice thing about it is jumping in and playing it for like half an hour or so every day.
Yeah, because the games don't take long, right?
No, like, totally. And you can do the challenges really easily. Like you can knock out the challenges of like the daily stuff of play in a squad. The most annoying thing for me is like if I'm in a duos or a squads match with random people and they're bad, I'm like, man, I'm trying to get past round one and the people are not good enough to like keep up with me to get past round one. It's really annoying because I'm like, I just want to do the challenge. So there's one
thing that I'd like them to add, and I don't know if they ever will, but I really think they should. And this is because over time they've obviously added a lot of levels to Fall Guys since the original launch. And I want to be able to basically stop myself from ever being on certain levels. So I want a level picker where I can search, but say that I only want to be in games that are going to be these levels.
I never want to do the volleyball one again in my life. I hate it so much. It is it feels like the mechanics are not built for it. Like it is so random. Like, oh my God, that level sucks so hard. And there are multiple levels like that where like the one where you have to jump through hoops, but it's just like a circular arena.
There are certain levels that just feel like for the amount of levels they have, certain levels come up way too much.
Yeah, and I feel like having played it for like 15 hours, there are still levels I haven't seen, and there are still levels I've seen like once or twice. And there are other levels I've played like 50 times, and there's no consistency there, I think.
Absolutely, and that's why I think something like, and I hate to bring up Call of Duty, but something like a map vote where they give you two options for the next game you're going to play and people who are left in can vote on which game they want. Even something like that could make it more interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I think that would be a good, well, at least a better approach than what they have at the moment, which feels like it's okay.
Completely random.
Yeah, I mean, I like that they're throwing in like different modes and things. Like the Sweet Thieves mode was quite fun, whatever it's called. And some of the challenges associated with that were pretty cool. And yeah, it's been nice. So basically, I wanted to get the battle pass, but I was like, well, also they have these costumes for Monkey Ball. I like Monkey Ball. Oh, there's also Gato Roboto there, which is like a super niche indie game that I like. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll pay you like 16 quid. So that's what I did. I got those two costumes and I bought the battle pass. But the nice thing about the battle pass is once you buy it, you can basically pay for the next one by just playing
because
through
you earn so much, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah,
for sure. No, I really enjoy it, and we should definitely play some of it.
100%. Let's do some duos. That'd be great.
As for, I assume you've played nothing else, really?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just continuing my adventures through Final Fantasy 14, which is a journey that'll take me 1,000 hours. Nice. So yeah, it's my chill game.
as for me, I mean, I've been playing bits and pieces. I reviewed Match Point Tennis recently, which is
Okay,
a new
nice.
tennis game. Like it, it's good fun. Like as far as a tennis game goes, it's probably the best one we've had in quite some time.
I mean, I don't remember there being any realistic like simulation style tennis games in years, right? Like it seems to
Precisely,
have
and
fallen off since the 360 generation, really.
yeah, and I mean, Top Spin 4 has always been held as the best one, and
Okay.
it still is the best one. But the thing I said about Match Point in my review was that even though it's held back by some kind of shortcomings off the court, when you're on the court playing the matches, it feels great to play. And that's why I would still consider it a good game. I'm intrigued to see, where the franchise goes if they continue to kind of make sequels and stuff,
Mhm.
because hopefully it could be the new Top Spin, because Top Spin isn't around anymore, right? Like
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
2K closed down that studio entirely.
Yeah.
So it's just like, oh, okay. Other than that, last night actually at the time of recording, I started playing in co-op The Quarry.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And the co-op's really interesting because you have two options. You have couch co-op, where you kind of pass the controller and each person takes control of a certain character. But what they've done differently, and I think it might be because The Quarry is obviously a bigger, longer game than the Dark Pictures games. But they've done something called the Wolfpack mode, where somebody plays and they can invite up to 7 of their friends, but their friends don't actually play the game. So all the movement and stuff is being done by the host. However, the other people can vote on the dialogue choices,
Oh, okay.
and they also have to perform the QCEs as well as the
Oh,
player.
do they do that like on their phone or something? Is that how that's built
Uh,
into it?
so I think they can do both. I think it's phone, controller,
Okay.
that kind of stuff. The only shortcoming with this mode, in my opinion, because it's actually a really interesting way to play, because it's almost like a movie where you still, I'm not really, because my friend is the host, so
Right.
he's doing the walking around and stuff, but I have to still constantly be prepared for a QTE,
Right.
and there
Yeah.
and there's a few where I've hit the QTE and he hasn't,
Oh no.
and we just and it's like, so, and the way it works is on percentages, right? So the more people you have, as long as more than 50% of you hit the QTE, you'll pass it.
Okay.
Um,
But I guess if
but
it's a split between two people, that's doesn't really
yes,
work that
so
way.
if it's split between two people, what we've found is that because he's the host, he overpowers me
Oh,
in terms of
okay.
voting power, right?
Right.
So if he gets it and I don't get it, we tend to pass it. But if
Okay.
I get it and he doesn't, then we fail.
Right.
But obviously, with more of us being able to play it, that would be more interesting, right?
Mhm.
So I think it is a really interesting way to experience these games, and I would love to do it with 6 or 7 people, kind of all voting, and it
Yeah.
tells you who votes for what as well,
Oh,
so
okay.
you can
Nice.
see what choices people are making. Um, and the other thing is, there are things that you can kind of pick up in the game, right? Like different items that might help you or whatever. And as a player who's watching my friend move around, I've actually got a cursor that I can kind of move around the screen and then highlight certain things. So if he doesn't see them, I can kind of highlight, oh,
Oh,
there's
okay.
there's
It's almost like
something
a
there.
ping system from a battle royale, right? Like just
Yeah,
showing
yeah. So
showing
so it's
what
a
to
really
look at.
interesting way of doing it,
Yeah.
considering that in the Dark Pictures games, obviously, yes, they are shorter, but their style of co-op is I'll control one character and my friend will control one character.
Yes, and you have like different experiences in those games as well, where like
Yeah.
someone's underneath the ocean and someone's on top on the boat,
And
right?
it's
Like,
weird because so far I don't prefer one or the other way of playing. They're just different, right? Like this feels a little bit more like a kind of passive experience, but it's also super interesting because it
mhm,
means that we're both responsible for the same character.
right.
So it's that kind of thing where like if we mess up, it's on both of us. It's
Yeah.
not like Dark Pictures where I could do things perfectly and my friend might be terrible at something, right? Like there's a few, in those games, there's a few things where you have to like hold your breath and tap buttons in
Right.
a
Yeah.
sequence.
Mhm.
And it's like one of us would always mess those up. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, but now because we both have to do it all the time, do you see what I mean? It
Yeah.
makes it a bit more interesting. And I could see this, like I said, with more people. I could actually see this being an amazing way to experience the game.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about these games is that people were doing that with Until Dawn originally, right? People were just getting together and playing it in groups. And yeah, I mean, these games are not for me in terms of I hate horror of any kind. I am massively scared.
So
in
you're
every
basically the new Sean. Sean hated horror.
Yeah.
So
no, I cannot stand it. I will never touch this experience. But the thing is,
so you've never played Resident Evil?
No, I will run 1,000 miles away. If anyone, the idea of Resident Evil 8 in VR, that will never in my life. I would rather
we're gonna find a way. We're gonna find a way for a special video or something.
Not happening. Absolutely never happening. But the funny thing is, I actually watched a Let's Play of Until Dawn back in the day.
Oh, okay.
There's that almost a bit of a remove to it that helps because you're not playing it directly.
It's that passive experience, right? It's the
totally.
the difference between, I don't know, it's the difference between kind of doing an escape room yourself and watching someone else do an escape room.
There's also so the group I watched, Jesse Cox, who's a YouTuber who I've watched for years and years, and he does it with a group of friends and they call it Scary Game Squad, and they've been doing it for the Quarry. So I actually was thinking, oh, maybe I'll start watching them play through it, because that's like a fun way to experience it and not have to have that kind of like tense experience that I would have playing it alone, so
yeah, for sure. And yeah, I don't know, like I'm gonna be playing more of the game tonight, so we'll see. I don't know how long it is. I just know that it is a longer game than the Dark Pictures.
Seems more in line with Until Dawn in terms of length and quality as well, it seems like, from what people have said.
So I am intrigued to kind of play more of it. I know that Luke has obviously had his playthrough on the YouTube channel, and there's been some funny clips that have come out of that, and I mean, I literally made him into a GIF from one of those clips because I just thought it was hilarious. So,
very good.
So it's going to be interesting to kind of play because my thing is, I've actually owned the game since day one, so I could have played it by myself.
Yeah.
But for me, there's something about experiencing these games with a friend.
Yeah.
There's something about, I actually think nowadays there's not enough co-op in video games.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you can see like people want it. It Takes Two just sold like 7 million copies or something.
I know.
Crazy.
So yeah, that's kind of the main thing I've been playing recently. And then other than that, I've just kind of been thinking about, we're coming into quite a busy time.
Yes,
so I've actually been trying to schedule what I'm gonna play.
Yeah, I mean, I literally booked a week off of work to play Xenoblade 3. So that's where we're at for me anyway.
Fair enough.
Lots of stuff.
Fair enough. I mean, I still have to go back and play Kirby. I own that.
And they've just announced a second Kirby. They're announcing games before you can play them, Jordan. They're so fast.
So yeah, I mean, I didn't finish Metroid Dread either. So we'll see.
Man.
We'll see with that one.
Yeah.
But it's there's so many games, and like Nintendo are clearly having a very good year this year. With Xenoblade coming and Bayonetta 3 as well.
Yeah, they just announced that, which is exciting stuff.
And obviously another Pokemon game, which I believe
Mario plus
might be the first time
back.
ever. Is this the first time ever that they've done 2 like Pokemon releases in 1 year?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because Arceus is not really a mainline release, but also kind of a mainline release.
It is.
It's this weird like half step, which it feels like they took the half step and now they're taking the full step, right?
Yeah, it felt like Arceus was almost like they went, oh, we'll do this and we'll see what people think of it.
Yeah.
And then we'll fully execute it next time.
Yeah, totally.
It was almost like a test for this upcoming game.
Right. Yeah.
But then,
it's
but then,
crazy.
if you're developing both at the same time, why not just put all that effort into one?
Yeah,
you do have to
you
wonder at
would
some
think,
point.
but the Pokemon Company needs their scheduled
Yeah.
money on time every
And
year.
and I
So
guess the other thing is they know that Pokemon games sell and also review well most of the time,
very
regardless.
soon, very
Right?
soon, I think that the top 10 most best-selling Switch games will probably be about 6 of them Pokemon games, right?
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
going to happen.
Absolutely.
So
So let's talk about some of the best Nintendo games because obviously
sure,
they're having a
yeah.
very strong year this year, but they have a very, very strong history, right? And I kind of tasked you with bringing 5 to the table.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to start with you. And what have you got on your list?
Cool. So my number 5 is Super Smash Brothers, any iteration. So I'm kind of like going
Okay.
franchise wide with this one because there are elements of every Smash game that speak to me in different ways, right? Like I was telling you, I think I can't remember if this was before we started or when we started about Smash Melee
Mm-hmm.
being like that was a revelation for me. Like playing that game for the first time, seeing that game for the first time
Yes.
was incredible, and it was really my entryway into understanding all of
Yeah.
Nintendo's
So,
history and
so the other thing
franchises.
is that game will always hold a special place for you, right?
Yes,
Because it is your entry point into
yeah,
something that probably has only got better since there.
yeah,
But
totally.
it's like people, obviously Ultimate is like literally the ultimate version of. Do you
Yeah,
know what I mean? Like,
but I think that the introduction to me to Nintendo through Smash Brothers was really special because it's
yeah.
like, who the hell is Captain Falcon? I don't have any idea. Who's
And
this like
also the other
Fire
thing is
Emblem
there's
guy?
no other company who's been able to do that, right?
Yeah,
Like PlayStation isn't able to do that. They've tried with a couple of different types of games over the years,
mm-hmm.
and it just doesn't really work.
Yeah,
And Xbox have never even tried because they haven't really had enough franchises to do that kind of bigger game with. Maybe in the future they will do something now.
it seems like there are a bunch of other companies just trying to do it, right? Nickelodeon with their game,
I
the
mean, I
Warner
think
Brothers one.
Sega have done a few over the years, right? They've done a
Yeah,
couple of.
they've mainly done it in the kart racing space with like their Sega and Sonic All Star Racing
Mhm.
stuff, where they kind of get people together.
Yeah.
But yeah, no one really does it like Nintendo does with Smash Brothers. And yeah, as a kind of introduction to, especially even on Brawl. In Brawl, they had like a bunch of demos for like Nintendo games you could play through that game as well. And then
Well,
Smash
you are the
4 and
Nintendo guy, so I trust you here. But
yeah.
I will say, if you had to pick one, which one would it be?
That's really difficult. I think overall, I would actually probably go with the Wii U game, Smash 4. And I'm a weird appreciator of the Wii U. I love that damn thing. One of my
You're
favorite
one of
consoles.
the 2 people who bought the console.
Yeah, no, of course, yeah. Had a great time. It was fantastic. But the thing with Smash Wii U was that it had all of that Nintendo history stuff that I really appreciate. So all the trophies, all the different like weird challenge stuff that you could do in there. It for me was a stronger single player approach to Smash Brothers than what Ultimate did, because Ultimate had like their own like big campaign thing, which I didn't find amazing. And they do the spirits, and spirits are just they're like I get it. Tim Geddes wants to collect all the spirits, whatever. They're just fucking like JPEGs. They're nothing interesting. Whereas the trophies, like these full 3D models, they had like text descriptions explaining where it came from. Like it's Nintendo history in a video game, like a museum almost. And I think that aspect of Smash Brothers is as important to me as the actual fighting
Yeah,
gameplay elements.
because it's almost like you don't have a PlayStation 5, do you?
I do, yeah. I bought it last year.
So it's almost like Astro's Playroom, right? It's
Oh,
almost
totally.
like,
Yes.
it is like a museum for
Yeah.
Nintendo.
Oh man, yeah.
And when they get that and they nail that aspect as well as the core game, then it is something special.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
It's the same reason that on PlayStation 5 I still consider Astro's Playroom one of the best games on that console.
I think it's
so
the best
far.
game. Yeah, I think it is the best game on the console. Like, I don't think there's anything as good as that. Honestly, it's fantastic, and I wish Nintendo would do something like that. You know, like I would love to jump around on a GameCube and open up its disc and hide inside. You know, like It's so cool.
Brilliant.
Like that game is incredible. It's so good. So
That I feel like that's a strong starting point.
Yeah, for sure.
I of course have to bring a few here, but I'm not as much of a Nintendo guy as you. I have a bit of a weird history with Nintendo. Played a lot of N64 back in the day. Never owned a GameCube, but my brother had one, so I did play a few games there. But and one of those games, or one of the games I want to talk about, my first experience was on the GameCube with that, and I feel like that might be the first one actually. And I'm just gonna say, and again, this is kind of the same thing for me. Any of these games, but Pikmin, right?
Like, okay, yeah, absolutely.
To me, that's one of the games that sticks out as like really original, really unique, and so Nintendo at the same time. Like, I don't think anybody else could have made that game in the same way Nintendo did and had it actually be meaningful for people. Like, people genuinely care about this franchise.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, for sure. It's so interesting because the only one I've played is Pikmin 3. And I would say from what I've heard from people, Pikmin 3 is the best one in the series. And I didn't realize how much of like a Metroid style game Pikmin is, of you're figuring out where to go, going back, like opening gates, like having the right type of Pikmin to get through the right type of area. Like it has a lot of those elements to it, which I loved and I thought was such a cool approach.
It's not as basic a game as it first appears to be.
Yeah.
And that's what I always loved about it, was learning these things as I was going around the world and being like, oh, I need the little red guy to do this thing.
Exactly.
It's and also it helps that they just look cool, right?
They're very cute. It also makes you feel really bad when at the end of the day you're like leaving your ship and you're like, oh, I left some behind. Well, I guess they're dead now because the monsters come out at night and just eat them. And also like when they die, when you're throwing them, the little ghosts come out and just like the spirit, and you're like, this is horrible, Nintendo. Like there's a weird like morbid nature to Pikmin.
So for me, that's one of the games, and any of those games in that series just kind of stick out as very unique, even for Nintendo, like by Nintendo standards. You know, it was because Nintendo's a lot of Mario, Zelda, all those kind of things, right? And those are great. We'll talk about some of those, I'm sure. But when they have these kind of almost like what people might consider B category games, they're still special. They're still like, that's the thing about Nintendo, is Nintendo's worst game is still most of the time a good game. Like,
it's better than most other video games usually. So except for Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival, that's not a video game. That's torture. That's what that thing is.
And I guess the other thing is, for me, it was the thing where Pikmin was one of the games, because I think the first one came out on GameCube, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
And it was one of those games I played, and I was like, I kind of want this console now just to play more of this game. Yeah. And that says something to me about how good that game was at the time. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm sure if I went back and played the first Pikmin now, I'd be like, oh, it's not as good as Pikmin 3 or whatever.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But at the time, it felt like something special, and it was a game that grabbed my attention that I didn't expect to grab my attention.
I would love if they remade 1 and 2 and put them on Switch, honestly, because they did versions. They did a Wii version for, I think, both of them. Although the second one, I think that was Japan only, the Wii new play control for Pikmin 2. But for me, like the way that, again, coming back to the Wii U love, I played Pikmin 3 on Wii U. And it's the best way to play that game because you have the motion controls, but also you have the gamepad, so you can basically direct where the other people need to go while also having like the ease of use. Like, it's some of the best motion controls I've ever played, honestly. And that's what the Wii U did. So
So what else do you have on your list over there?
Yeah, so I am always going to have a Fire Emblem game on my top 5 Nintendo games. Just depends which one, how I'm feeling. The one I usually go to is Sacred Stones, which is the second one on Game Boy Advance. It's one that I don't think a lot of people really talk about that much, because I think the first one on GBA was a big deal.
I'm not a huge Fire Emblem guy,
Yeah.
but I will say that that's one that I've never even heard of.
Well, there you
And
go,
the other
right?
ones I've heard of. Do you know what I
Yeah, and
mean?
especially I think that was before it became a big deal. Like Awakening on 3DS is where more people started hearing about the series. I got into it from there was a German exchange student who was staying with us, and he had the first game, the Fire Emblem 7. It's actually the seventh game, but the first one
Yeah.
that came to
Mhm.
Europe and North America. And he had it, and I played it like while he was staying at our house. I was like, this is amazing. I have to play this game. And so my parents got me the second Fire Emblem game on GBA, Sacred Stones, which is actually technically the third GBA Fire Emblem game because there was a Japan exclusive one, then the second one. Then so look, it's a lot, okay. But
Yeah. We
this
know.
is the one
We
I
all
this
know
is
how it works.
this is the one I grew up with, Sacred Stones,
Mhm.
and it's really, really good. Like it has a kind of dual narrative where you have a brother and a sister, and you basically choose a branching point in the middle of the game.
Oh,
So it
okay.
has like a nice replayability thing to like you go through and play one path, and then it comes back together at the end. So yeah, it has like for me, I kept going back to it when I was younger because there were so many, there's a lot of different options, right? Usually when you upgrade a unit in
And
Fire
when a game has replayability like that, you're always going to remember it more as well because you
yes.
put more time into it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And those are the games that, when you're younger, you don't have as many games. You're going to
Mhm.
gravitate towards the ones which, you can put a lot more time into. And so the availability of like, usually in Fire Emblem games, you can upgrade units from one class to another. So it's like a cavalier will become a paladin. And that's very much set in stone of like, okay, I'm just going to do this one thing to the other thing. The cool thing about Sacred Stones is it gave you different choices. So you had two different options every time you upgraded, which meant every time I played
Okay.
through, every character could be a different class. So
So
it
you
was,
could do very different things
yeah, you could do really
to
different
affect your
playthroughs.
experience. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
totally. And different support conversations, which has become a huge thing in the modern part of the series. And yeah, I just love the core combat of those games. Like the grid-based map and figuring out like where to position people and everything is super fun. So I've always been a huge Fire Emblem fan, and yeah, one of my
Fair,
favorites.
fair. I am noticing so far that there's a bit of a like in our choices,
Mhm.
we are having a bit of a nostalgic element, and
Yeah,
maybe
definitely.
that's something to do with Nintendo, and
Yeah.
kind of maybe it shows how well their games kind of just stick with people, right? Because I've played games on PlayStation, for example, especially back on the PS1, or even the early days of the PS2, which I loved those games at the time, but I probably couldn't remember what they are now
Yeah.
unless I saw them. Do you know
Right.
what I mean? Like obviously there are some that really do stick with you, but with Nintendo, it feels like they have more of those games, I guess is what I'm trying to
They're
say.
more
Where
iconic, like they stand out. They have franchises that they last the test of time for a reason, right? And I
and
think
they
that's
also have franchises that people know even if they've never played those franchises, right? Like
yes.
that's the difference, I
Yes.
think, with Nintendo is, you know, people know Splatoon, for example, as a recent example. People
Yeah.
know Splatoon even
Mhm.
if they've never played it and never intend to play it.
Yeah.
They know that it's a Nintendo game. So I think they know how to make things memorable very clearly.
Yeah,
and
for
and
sure.
and I also think, you know, one thing is, and this kind of leads into my next entry. One thing is they also know how to make something special and then build on that thing with like future entries,
Hmm.
right? And for me, this is the reason I chose this one is just because it's the first one I played, which
Yeah.
is weird because it wasn't on the first Nintendo console I owned.
Okay.
So the original Mario Kart.
Okay. The Super Nintendo one.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
really interesting.
I actually played it before Mario Kart 64,
Okay.
even though I owned a 64, and yeah, I think it was just because it was one of those things where like we had a Super Nintendo laying around
Yeah.
and we had some games, and one day I just wanted to play some games, but my brother was on the N64 or whatever, so I just hooked up the old. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, this is cool. Like this is a cool little game, and like if even back then it was good. Like it wasn't just some kind of vanillaware. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't
Mhm.
just a game where they kind of went, oh yeah, we'll just stick on this bit of a rubbish racing game that no one's ever going to think about again. That like it felt like some thought really went into it, and what they've been able to do from there. And obviously we've now had like Mario Kart 8 several times. And hopefully they'll do a new one eventually.
Who knows? Apparently, Mario Kart 8 is the only game that will ever come out for the series for the rest of time. But that maybe.
But yeah, for me, sometimes I like to just kind of pay tribute to games that started something. And the
Yeah.
original Mario Kart is one of those things, right? Because it's Nintendo without Mario Kart games are now unimaginable, right?
Yeah,
Like you just
it's so crazy that a spin-off is now the most successful franchise that they have, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
insane. Like how did that happen? But very clearly a lot of people,
Yeah.
it's just very accessible, right? It's easy to get into, like
And it's good for all ages as well.
Yeah,
That's the other thing.
Yeah.
Because you can, depending on which CC you choose, that makes a
Right.
difference to the difficulty of these tracks. And you can have some really intense races. Like there are people who play this game professionally.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And their races are intense, but you can also give the game to a 5-year-old and
especially in the newer
they'll be able
games,
to play it.
They've built in options like easy steering, so you don't fall off the course and stuff like that, right?
Yes.
Like it's so accessible, which is really, really nice for people. But,
so for me, I just wanted to shout out that one, and I do.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's necessarily the best Mario Kart game.
Yeah, I wouldn't say.
But-
Yeah, I've gone back to it multiple times because it's been re-released a bunch of times. Like the Super Nintendo Classic had it, and it's been on Switch Online. Every time I try and play it, it feels a bit archaic to me. It's hard to get into because of the kind of sprite-based nature of it. The Mode 7 like element is tricky.
Absolutely. And that's the thing is, I get it. Like it's not the best Mario Kart game, and I could have put any of the others here, right? I think the reason this one deserves to be here is because it started one of the biggest franchises in the world.
Yeah,
it's kind of like why when I'm discussing Xbox, I always push for Halo 1 over Halo 2, even though Halo 2 is the better game.
I would I would pull Halo 1 off any list because I think that game sucks. Frankly, I really don't like Halo 1.
Wow.
Halo 1 is like one of the most infuriating, like frustrating experiences I've ever had with an old game. Like going back to it.
One day we really need to talk about this
because I think it has some of the most garbage level design I've ever seen in a game, and I do not understand the reverence people have for it. It's it's one of those that I definitely have spicy hot takes on.
One thing I will say before we move on just on Halo is I would describe it as one of those moment in time games.
Yeah, 100%.
Where you had to play it at the time to appreciate it.
And the multiplayer was such a big experience, part of that experience as well. Obviously, people like the campaign, but multiplayer, I think, is the thing that defined Halo.
Absolutely. And I mean, we've played a bit of Halo Infinite.
Oh, yeah. Look, I love Halo Infinite. I had a great time with that. Halo 1, no, never.
I'm glad that the franchise is still alive. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Because that could have gone badly. But for me, Mario Kart, the original Mario Kart, just because it was such a strong foundation at the time, and I don't think there was, at least from what I know, there wasn't really anything like it. Other games copied it after, but do you know what I mean?
Nothing had like you have the PS1 era where Crash is trying to do it, and Jack eventually tried to do a racing game, and there was Diddy Kong Racing, which I think probably got the closest in terms of the kind of feel and what you're looking for, but nothing really approaches Mario Kart when it comes to like the fundamentals. And I think no other company is willing to put the amount of money that Nintendo does behind those games. You can see it with the Sega racing games. Like they're totally fine.
I just think that nobody believes that they can be as big as Mario Kart, right? So they don't even try.
It's the same thing with Smash Brothers, right? The reason these other games don't stand up is because they don't have the budget to be that polished and like exceptionally executed.
Absolutely. So what is next for you?
So my number 3, sticking with the niche kind of like more Japanese side of the company, Xenoblade Chronicles. I was just talking about this to you about taking a week off for Xenoblade 3. Xenoblade Chronicles, the original, is absolutely probably my favorite JRPG ever made. It
Okay.
is an
That's
incredible,
like high praise.
yeah. It's for me. It's like the setup of this world is that there are two titans who have died, and people just live on them now, and like they're basically locked in combat. Like thousands of years ago they were like fighting each other, and now they're just like dead and people live on them, and you just go on this adventure like going through.
How delightful.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing setup, and like you see these different places off in the distance. Like you can see the other titan from the one that you're on, and you travel across its body, like up through its chest and onto its head and all that stuff, and all the locations are built with that in mind. But it has like an incredible story, like amazing characters, and its combat system is really interesting. It's more like MMO style combat where you're almost choosing different skills while you auto attack. So it has a kind of different approach in that way. And I know this is a series that has kind of like become a bit more popular in recent years as a result of the Switch and having Xenoblade 2 do quite well.
Isn't it funny though how so many Nintendo franchises have that same kind of thing where they start off quite niche,
yeah,
and not very popular, and then people realize how good they actually were.
I mean, like there was
super popular.
There was a whole campaign for this game, right? Because originally Nintendo of America didn't want to release. There are these three big RPGs on the Wii: The Lost Story, Pandora's Tower, and Xenoblade Chronicles. And the fans basically got together and made this petition called Operation Rainfall to get these games localized for North America.
It was you, wasn't it, MBZ?
No, it wasn't me. It wasn't me, because I lived in Europe, still live in the UK, and in the UK, Nintendo of Europe was bringing these games out. So Nintendo of Europe
what a weird situation.
Well, here's the thing, right? So you'll notice with Xenoblade 3, all the actors are British or like British Isles, like Irish or Welsh. The reason that it happened is because North America, Nintendo of America, didn't want to publish the game. And so it was up to Nintendo of Europe to hire all the voice actors to do all the stuff for that.
What a strange situation.
It's really weird, but that's how the series has got this identity now, where all the characters are British or like, you know, Welsh. They all have those types of accents because Nintendo of Europe were the people who actually brought it over. So they localized it. And then eventually, after fans badgered Nintendo of America enough, they finally brought them over as like a GameStop exclusive. So it was really hard to get a hold of. But it's really weird to see this series, this game that started off as a super niche thing that like only hardcore people were asking for.
And now it's like a highly anticipated title, right?
Yeah, exactly. It gets its own Nintendo Direct. You know, fans are really so
like it feels like
have risen a lot.
It feels like it went from kind of obscurity to that kind of B-level Nintendo game we were talking about earlier, where it maybe isn't Mario or Zelda, but it's kind of the next best thing, and it's in the group of next best games that Nintendo have, right?
Exactly. And for me, that's great, right? Because I'm a fucking nerd, and I was playing Fire Emblem before it was cool. I was playing Xenoblade before it was cool, and now they're cool, and I feel good about it, right? Like I feel good
when you've supported something all the way through, right? And you finally get that vindication of one, oh, I was right about this. Like, you know what I mean? Because part of it is, oh, I was right. I knew this game was good from the start, and now people understand it as well.
Yeah.
But two, you just love to see a game that you love get more support and be able to do bigger things.
Right, because it means more sequels, it means more games in the series. Like it's really exciting when that happens.
Absolutely. So you know, that's part of the reason that over on PlayStation, I'm quite excited for the re-release of Last of Us Part 1, because with the things they're doing to that game, especially the accessibility options, I know that people are going to play that game who've never been able to play it before.
Yeah, and I mean, with their TV series coming out, like it just opens it to a bigger audience than ever before.
Precisely. So I'd love to see that kind of stuff, and I'm glad that Xenoblade, you know, has
absolutely, it's one of my favorite stories in games. Like its characters are exceptional. Like I love the world. I think the world, also the soundtrack. For me, music is a very big part of like games that I love. And Xenoblade Chronicles is my favorite soundtrack of all time. Like it is astonishingly good. So yeah, absolutely one of my favorites.
So now this is where me being less of a Nintendo guy comes a little bit, people will start to realize.
Okay.
Because I'll have a few more recent games.
Sure, no, that's fair.
So my third game is Mario Odyssey.
Okay, hell yeah.
I think it's just a superb game. I've played many Mario games over the years, but this felt like one of the best ones that I've played.
It is one of the most polished games I have ever played. Like, you can look at games and think, oh, that's a bit janky. There's something wrong here. I don't think I can see any flaws. Like, it is almost flawless as a game. Yeah. Like,
and it came paced, out, and that's the thing, right? Like, it's not only that, but it had no bugs. From what I can remember, the performance was brilliant.
Yeah, 60 frames per second on Switch, right? Like, insane, and it still looks that good. You know?
Yeah. So for me, and like I said, I have played other Mario games before this. I played on the N64. That was also one of the first games I played, and that was a great game. But Mario Odyssey kind of felt like that game on steroids.
Mario Odyssey is just like, it's one of the most creative games I've ever played in my life. Like, every time you go to a new location, have new enemies that you can capture.
I also never finished it. That's the other thing. I never finished it, and I still love it.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, you need to go back, and if you've not seen like the end stuff of that game, it goes some places. Like, there's some places you go to. There's one boss I'm thinking of in particular that I was like, wait, we're doing this in a Mario game? Like, absolutely wild stuff. So yeah, I would definitely encourage you to go finish it up, because it has some of my favorite stuff at the end, actually. It's really, really good.
Nice. So. So I mean, for me, we had to have some sort of Mario games on these lists.
Yeah.
Because Mario is Nintendo, right? Like, it often feels like, what would Nintendo be without Mario? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mario is probably the most recognizable video game character in the entire world.
Still to this day, like, I don't know, maybe Sonic is getting there with his success at the movies, but Mario's coming with a movie as well soon, so who knows how that's going to go.
Absolutely. It's just going to be Chris Pratt.
yeah, that's it. Yeah, he'll just man, I don't know what to think about that, but we'll see.
It's either going to be amazing or it's going to be terrible.
No, I think it's just going to be terrible. I'm pretty sure that's the only option here, Jordan, is it's bad. That's
probably
that's probably what's going to happen. But yeah, no, Mario Odyssey is an incredible game, and I think
that had to be my choice, just because that first year of the Switch.
Yes.
And I'm sure we'll talk about one of the other games in that year. But that first year of the Switch felt like one of Nintendo's best years ever.
Yeah.
It felt like they really kind of front loaded the Switch, because they knew that, I think they probably knew this hardware was going to be hard to sell to certain people, right? Where people were a little bit apprehensive about, what is this kind of portable thing that I plug into my TV, and is it really going to be good at actually running games?
I mean, especially coming off the Wii U, like, they must have been a little bit worried, because they're like, well, I mean, we kind of tried this, but we're kind of doing it again in a weird, different way. Will it work? Will it not?
And I feel like they super front loaded the Switch with releases, in terms of, two of their biggest franchises in the first year.
Yeah, starting with one and ending with another, like, it was a great sandwich of stuff. So,
and then, you can say what you want, like, maybe that caused a little bit of dry patch here and there for them, but it hasn't mattered, right? Like, the Switch has gone on to sell massively, and
continues to. I
feel like Super Mario Odyssey is a massive part of that, right? Because people hear about this game and they want to play it. That's one thing that Mario games have that I think is just universal, regardless of the genre that Mario's in. Like, people want to play Mario Kart. They want to play a 3D Mario game. They want to play a 2D Mario game.
It's approachable to everybody, right? That's the thing that is universally appealing. Is like, it's the funny thing, right? Like, I think you get to, some people hit a certain age in maybe your early teenage years where you're like, oh, that's Mario's not cool anymore. I'm playing Call of Duty now because I'm cool. But then you come back around in your early 20s.
I mean, it's funny, right? Because that, not exactly, but that kind of was me. I played Nintendo games for years, and then actually dropped off of it during the Wii generation. Like, there's a couple of Wii games that I played, but it just wasn't really for me. And I was the Call of Duty and FIFA player during those years. Do you know what I mean? And then obviously the Wii U kind of completely passed me by. I didn't even at the time, I didn't even realize it was a new console. It
Uh-huh.
was, do you know what I mean? It was
Uh-huh.
one of those situations. It wasn't until a friend of mine had one. I was like, oh, this is a brand new thing. But they
Oh,
didn't
this is HD.
they
Oh, okay.
they didn't actually message that well
Yeah,
at
yeah,
all. And that's why it failed.
yeah,
Um
totally.
and then they come out with the Switch, which, again, I only really use the Switch for exclusive Nintendo games, but every exclusive Nintendo game I kind of want to play, and that says something, right? Like
Yeah.
even Xenoblade 3, I haven't played. Like I played a little bit of 2, but I
Okay.
didn't own it. I played it. I kind of borrowed it from someone. Played a little
Right.
bit of it. Thought it was cool, but it didn't
Two is
super.
okay. I wouldn't say that's the one to play personally. So
Yeah,
yeah.
so it didn't super grab me, but it grabbed me enough to the point where I want to play 3. Like I
Yeah.
look at 3 and I think, yes, I do want to play this.
Mhm.
It's one that I'm obviously going to wait for whatever the reception is to it,
Yeah,
because if
sure.
people say that it's bad, I'm not going to go out and,
Yeah, totally.
these Nintendo games aren't cheap. Do you know what I mean?
Nope. Nope.
And yeah, so I've had a weird history with Nintendo. And that's why, for me, some of my favorite Nintendo games have come in the last 5 years. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
And honestly, they are some of the best. Like, I think a lot of people like to say, oh, well, only old games were good, everything new is bad. And I just fundamentally disagree. I think new games are better than old games on almost every level. Like, there are some exceptions, but I would say
There
that
are
games,
certain things that new games will always be better at, right?
yeah, of
Like
course.
they're
Yeah.
always going to look better. They're always going to
I
be
think fundamentally
smoother in terms of
feel
certain
better,
things.
right?
Yeah.
Like we've come so far in terms of control. Like that is probably, and for me, that's like the most fundamental thing about games that I care
Yeah.
about is how good it feels to move around.
And
So
of
like,
course, you can say things like new games are easier because there was more challenge back in the day and stuff.
yeah,
But that challenge comes from limitation. It
it's also
wasn't
artificial,
necessarily a
right? Like
design
it's
choice.
that stuff came out of an era that was based around arcades where like difficulty was built on getting people's money because you wanted them to
Precisely.
die a ton so that they could put more
Precisely.
coins into the machine, right? And that bled over to the NES era where you get
Yeah.
stuff like Ninja Gaiden
And
that's
then
just like
eventually it
difficult in a
found
bad
its way
way.
out, right? Because people
Yeah.
realized actually the way we make money is selling people these games. And once we've sold them the game, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, they've got their money.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
So, yeah, but what is your next Nintendo game?
So my number two is Metroid Fusion.
Oh, okay.
For many years, my number one game was Metroid Fusion. It has been dethroned now, but still holds a very special place in my heart. Obviously talking about Smash Brothers. That's probably the first place I found out what Metroid was and like who Samus is. And then I was doing a school play and my friend was playing this game on the Game Boy. And I was like, oh, what is this thing? Had a look over and I saw Metroid Fusion. I was like, man, that looks really cool. Like he was fighting one of the bosses, seemed really intense, like very vibrant and colorful. Weirdly, like for a dark sci-fi universe, Metroid Fusion is a weirdly colorful game. Very bright. Obviously, Samus's suit is blue and yellow, like very garish, you might say, but still
Yeah.
stands out a lot. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, Mom, I need to buy this game. Similar to like Fire Emblem. It's like, that was a thing back then, I think, of like seeing these games where like, I need to own this now. It's the thing I want to play. And yeah, I absolutely adore that game. I've played it probably more times than any game in my life. I think I've finished it probably in the area of 10 to 15 times. And usually I 100% it when I play through it as well. So
Jesus.
yeah, so I absolutely adore this game. Like it was so nice when it came out on the 3DS Ambassador program because it was one of those games that you got when if you were an idiot and bought the 3DS early for a high price, then you got a bunch of free GBA games. It was one of those. And so I've replayed it multiple times through there. I did a Let's Play of it back in the day. Like I played through
Are you one of those Nintendo guys who will spend money knowing that Nintendo is kind of half ripping you off? Like,
No, usually not. I don't I didn't rebuy 3D World when it came out on Switch because I wanted to play Bowser's Fury. I was like, no, Nintendo, give me a way to play that without having to rebuy your other game that I've already played. Like usually I'm very much against that. But there are certain games where I will, buy them again.
because I just feel like Nintendo have had this weird history, right, with their gamers, right,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of they have great games and they know they have great games, but because they have so many great games, they will sell them to you again and again and again.
Oh yeah, they
because
exploit the hell out of people. Yeah, for sure. And people keep falling in line because that's what people are like. They have ties to their nostalgia.
And also people will pay for something if they really want it, right? Even if they know they shouldn't have to pay for it.
Yeah.
If they it's the same with the kind of, on a different scale, but it's the same with the upgrade fees that we see on PlayStation for certain games, right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously they've got a little bit of bad press for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Because they're charging people to upgrade a game they already own. And it's like, should they really have to do that?
Yeah, no, it doesn't make sense. But yeah, Metroid Fusion's one that's not come up that often. It was on Wii U Virtual Console, but there's no GBA support on Switch yet, so it's not showed up there. In fact, when Dread was coming out, because Fusion is a direct prequel to Dread, on the Wii U eShop, before that happened, Metroid Zero Mission and Metroid Fusion shot up to the number 1 and 2 spot on the Wii U eShop because it's the only way people could buy them. So like there was a weird news article about that where people were just like buying it there. But yeah, it's a really interesting game because it's almost a horror experience in a strange way where like you have this weird clone of Samus who is slowly creeping around the station following you and you have to escape it. And it's probably the most action packed of the series, like a lot of boss fights. But I would say Dread actually
would you say, because obviously it's your favorite one.
Yeah.
Would you say that it's the best Metroid game?
I think Dread is probably the best one at this point.
Okay.
I think Dread overall, like as an experience, it is one of the smoothest. Like talking about control, right? Like the modern implementation of the controls in Metroid Dread is like extremely smooth in a way that I rarely feel in games. And I think that game is so well designed with its bosses, its world, its storytelling. Like its storytelling is the best in the series, I think. So yes. Dread, I think overall is probably the best 2D Metroid. I think Super Metroid from a design perspective is probably better than Fusion in terms of its interconnected world and stuff. But I don't like the way Super Metroid controls. I think that game is held back by its archaic controls. And I think that, if they were to remake it, if they remake
I was going to say
Metroid,
that's very much a thing of the time, right? Like,
yes.
They couldn't do anything else.
Yeah, exactly. So if they remade Super Metroid in the Dread engine, I think that probably is the best Metroid
I would
game
buy
overall.
that. Like Nintendo, you can charge me any money for that.
Well, see, here you go. This is exactly what I'm talking about, right? Like, they've got us by the, easily. So, but yeah, I think it is. Enough. It's just such a.
I'm glad that
game.
one of us brought up a Metroid game because Metroid Until Dread kind of felt like the forgotten Nintendo hero, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's such a key game in Nintendo's history, and a very important game for them over time, and then they just kind of forgot about it for a long time.
Yeah.
And and then they made one of the best games, probably the best game in the series, being Metroid Dread.
Yeah, exactly.
So when they want to, they can please us and do the right thing.
Yes, but only when they want to,
So I'm going to kind of talk about my number 1 and number 2 at the same time, just because they're somewhat connected.
Cool.
So my number 2, I actually think could be my number 1 because I do think it's a better game. But number 1 is where it is because of what it means to me.
Mm-hmm.
And number 2 is Breath of the Wild.
Okay.
I think it is, up there for best Nintendo game ever. I think there's no doubt about that. I think the physics-based stuff is amazing. I think the sense of adventure is the best it's ever been in a Zelda game. Yes, there are a couple of little things that I would probably change about it, but as an overall game, it feels like what Zelda was always meant to be and what they wanted Zelda games to be, and they just didn't have the technology to execute it in that way.
Right, I mean, it shares the most in common with the original Legend of Zelda. When you really strip everything back, that is the most directly comparable game in the series is weirdly this NES game, right? Is the one that you can compare it to the most.
Which looks nothing like it.
No, although they did build a prototype that was Zelda 1 with the Breath of the Wild physics engine built into it, which is crazy. And I hope they release that one day. But that was fascinating. They did a whole GDC talk on it. It's crazy. So yeah.
Wow. And then, of course, probably somewhat predictably, my number one has to be Ocarina of Time.
Okay, yeah.
Like for me, it is the game that connects me to Nintendo in my
Yeah.
gaming history. It is the first game I remember playing, so it's always going to have that special place of it. It in some way is the game that made me a gamer, right? Because if
Yeah.
that experience was bad, I may never have tried another video game.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? And I, like I said earlier, I started on a really high game, one of the best games ever made, the highest reviewed game ever.
Yeah, which I don't think will ever be touched, honestly, because how many reviewers there are these days, how much harsher critics are overall. Like, I don't think you'll
Precisely.
ever get that peak ever again.
Absolutely. And that's the thing is like this game at the time was one of the best things ever made. Sure, you can look back on it now and say, oh, it's not as good as modern games because of X, Y, and Z, but it's unfair to do that
Yeah.
because why would you it's like comparing a movie's CGI from 20 years ago to a movie that was made 6 months ago.
Yeah.
The CGI is going to be completely different because the technology is there.
Yeah.
And so you have to, I think people forget sometimes that you have to put games in their box. Like you have to kind of just say, right, this game came out at this time. How good was it for the time? It's not about how good is it today. That doesn't matter because most people aren't playing Ocarina of Time for the first time today. Most people played it when it came out. Like if you didn't play Ocarina of Time, you're probably just going to play Breath of the Wild now.
Yeah, and until they do remakes, which is why the 3DS remake was really nice and that was the way I finished the game for the first time. So I had played Ocarina of Time on and off throughout my life. As I mentioned, like me and my friend would play it when we were younger, but I never owned it because I never owned an N64. But then when the Wii came out, I bought it on Virtual Console. And so I played it there. I got like about halfway through. I never kind of like got to the end. Then finally, when the 3DS remake came out, that's when I fully committed to it, and I finished the game that time. And yeah, it's a really good version. Like it streamlines a lot of stuff, like the water temple and like all the Iron Boot stuff, and makes it a lot more easy to kind of navigate your items on the touchscreen. And I hope they put it out, on Switch at some point.
The other thing was at the time, it felt like it had quite innovative systems, right? Like at least for me, being one of the first games I played, I don't remember playing other games around that time where I had to change my outfits to do certain things,
right,
or whatever. Like they almost made the gameplay mechanics a puzzle themselves. And that's not, I don't mean that in a bad way. Like that's a good thing. Like actually going into a temple and figuring out, oh, okay, I need to wear this suit to get through this section. Then I need to change to this suit and whatever it might be. And it's like, at the time, I just don't think games really did that, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because in a lot of ways, it's kind of taking the ideas of Link to the Past and just moving them to 3D. But the way in which they did it, the fluidness of the execution, and like the innovations to combat systems, right? The reason we have lock-on targeting in Elden Ring today is because Ocarina of Time invented Z targeting, right? Like Elden Ring would be a much worse game if you didn't have the ability to lock onto enemies, and I would have been frustrated for 100 hours. But thanks to Ocarina of Time, we're at this point where those systems have been refined and figured out over the years.
And that's the funny thing, right? Is like, you know me, you know that one of my favorite games of all time is Shenmue, Dreamcast game.
Yes, yeah.
And I always say that I don't think that game gets the credit it deserves for its influence on the industry.
Sure.
And I think that many older games have that problem where people kind of look back to them and they go, yeah, they were cool, but they maybe don't realize the things that they did for the first time or they brought to the mainstream, which then were built on and made better, which make games what they are today.
Right. Yakuza doesn't exist without Shenmue, right? The entire series.
But that goes back to what you're saying about Zelda, about how things that they did in Ocarina of Time, especially being the first kind of 3D Zelda game, impacts all action 3D kind of games now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Just with the target lock and even some of the systems, even some of the way that puzzles work in games come from that game. And I think that people often forget to kind of they forget what these games did, because it's not until you take a second to look and kind of think that you realize, oh yeah, actually this game was more special, because without this game we wouldn't have these things, right?
Yeah.
It's the same reason that I look at something like the early Assassin's Creed games. They literally were the blueprint for the open world game.
Yeah. I mean, arguably that's a bad thing. You know, you could say.
I mean, yeah,
the
you
Ubisoft
could say
style
that.
of open world game. It depends on your perspective, but
you could say that. But what I mean is, even open world games in general, right? Like, yeah, okay, we had what we would have considered open world before that was something like GTA 3, right? Which was a semi-open world.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Assassin's Creed went open world. They created things like, obviously they created some stuff that people are now bored of, like a watchtower kind of system, stuff like that. But one thing they created, which is now used in pretty much any kind of action game, open world or not, is the way you can parkour. Like the way you actually move through the game itself. Assassin's Creed was the first game to do that. And people forget that as a thing.
I would also argue that Prince of Persia actually kind of like did a little bit of that beforehand. Like Prince of Persia is almost like the thing that gives
propelled,
birth to Assassin's
right?
Creed, right? Like it's kind of the foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the same thing, you know, and that's the thing about games, right? Is all these things come from somewhere.
You can keep going back across the line.
Like even the Ocarina of Time stuff comes from somewhere. There are very few completely original ideas in video games.
Yeah.
Exactly. But Nintendo seemed to have quite a few of them.
Yeah.
over their time.
Which, I guess my number one is your number two. It is Breath of the Wild. And it for me, the reason Breath of the Wild kind of like is at such a high pedestal and it's going to be very hard to top is I remember the first weekend of playing that game and I basically did nothing else. There was a whole day where I basically forgot to eat because all I did was I woke up, I played Breath of the Wild and I went to sleep. And like maybe I ate something, I can't even remember. But the thing that it did most of all was it made me feel like a kid again, right? Like I don't think I've had that experience of jumping into a world and being taken away by like the magic or the possibility of it in the same way that Breath of the Wild did. Like I never thought I'd get that feeling again. Like I had that feeling of like when I was a kid and, you know, my grandparents' house playing Pokemon Blue in the bathroom at 6 a.m. because I was so excited like to wake up and play this video game.
Do you know, there's one game. So there's one game that isn't a Nintendo game where I have had that feeling and I haven't played much of the game yet, but it does the same thing. And I hate to have this as the comparison, but Elden Ring.
Yeah.
And that is why Elden Ring is probably going to be Game of the Year this year, even if God of War Ragnarok is one of the best games ever made.
Yeah, totally.
Because it has that same thing where the sense of adventure and the sense of discovery in that world, and that's exactly what Breath of the Wild nailed, right?
Yeah, it's perfect.
And it did it better than any Zelda game before. And at the time, it did it better, arguably, than any game in existence.
It reinvented what open world games are, right? Like, I don't think Elden Ring exists in the same way if Breath of the Wild doesn't do what it does, you know? And it's going to take a while to, like, see the repercussions of Breath of the Wild. Yeah, but
absolutely.
It basically took this whole genre and was like, well, I don't think what Ubisoft is doing with open world games is actually the strength of open world games. And they basically made good open world games.
It showed people that there's another way to do open worlds, right?
Exactly.
And that's the thing, is that's what open worlds aren't a genre anymore. They're just a type of game that kind of moves across genres. But that is something that has revitalized the open world style of game, because now there are different ways to do it. And
I think it's because
single one needs to be the same.
it focuses on the world, right? And it's called Breath of the Wild. It's about
It
being
makes
outside.
the world a character in the
Yes,
game.
the
right?
world is the main character. And I don't think you can say that about stuff like Ghost of Tsushima or Horizon, because those games are built around more traditional structures where you have a story you have to go through, you have quest markers you have to hit.
But it's funny because even in those games, you know, I would say Ghost of Tsushima a little bit, but even in like you know, the latest Horizon game, and it's like you can see the Breath of the Wild influence there,
yeah,
but they're still trying to use that Breath of the Wild influence and stick to the original style.
They're trying to kind of fit a round peg into a square hole, or a square peg into a round hole, I guess, because I totally get it.
And it's funny because at the same time, if they can do both of those things and find this weird middle ground, that then gives us another style of open world game.
Yeah, I guess like some kind of like half step in between.
It's just like, it's that thing of, I guess it's that thing of, it's like any game we've ever seen, right? When a game does something so well, any other game that is kind of trying to half measure it or isn't able to execute it in the same way because they're also focusing on other things just feels a little bit inferior, right?
Yeah, and I think
that's not to be negative on those games, but I'm just talking about the design idea.
So last year and the year before, I was playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and I put like 60 hours into it. And I was like, this is good fun. Like, I'm enjoying going around and like doing all this stuff. And Cassandra's a great character.
And then it's like, I've done this before.
Well, the thing is, like, I think after Breath of the Wild, I was like still like interested in other open world games. But then as soon as Elden Ring came out earlier this year, so I did 60 hours of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and I finished the main story. And I was like, I'll probably go back and do side quests and stuff. And then I played Elden Ring, and I'm like, you know, I don't think I ever want to play one of those games again. You know, I think I just want this type of open world, because it feels like going back to that stuff feels like a step backwards in a way that I don't really want anymore. You know, like it feels like
you don't need that style of open world anymore, right?
Yeah.
Because you've had your fill of that style.
Yeah.
And I think that's why these games like Breath of the Wild are so important, because they allow for new things. Yeah. And Nintendo has always been front and center of doing this stuff, right? They are like the godfather of gaming at this point, where you may hate Nintendo, you may play no Nintendo games, but let me tell you now, they are so influential on other games that you love and play on other platforms that, like, let's not
every
forget.
Game designer in the industry is influenced by Nintendo in some way, right? Like,
absolutely.
They're revered.
And that doesn't mean that the same doesn't happen from the other companies as well. Yeah, that's not what I'm saying. You know, like, people are very clearly influenced by Naughty Dog.
Oh, for
sure.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Like, but Nintendo have done it time and time again with so many different franchises and so many different games. And we've given you 10 games here today. We could have given you 50 more. You know, it's
exactly. And like, if you just look at Zelda alone has redefined itself 3 times, right? Like, the Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, Breath of the Wild are like paradigm shifting games, like within one series. It's kind of crazy.
Absolutely. So yeah, I guess based on pure ranking in both of our lists, there you have it. Breath of the Wild is the best Nintendo game, in our opinion.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Which is maybe somewhat expected, you know, but when a game's that good,
it gives the sequel a lot to live up to, doesn't it? You know, and you know, I like what I've seen so far of the sequel, but we'll see.
Before we sign off today, though, there is one more Nintendo thing I wanted to do.
Okay.
Because over the years, they've had some amazing third-party exclusive games.
Yeah, sure.
You know, they've had some really, really special ones. And I wanted to kind of shout out a few of those that aren't necessarily Nintendo games, but are inherently connected to Nintendo, right?
Yeah, totally.
So the first one that I think of course, is a licensed game, Goldeneye.
Yeah, of course.
You know, it's like Goldeneye, again, is such a pivotal game in terms of shooters on console. And it's like, sure, people can go back and play it now and be like, oh yeah, but was it actually that good? And all this kind
it's
of
hard
stuff.
to play these days. It doesn't hold up as well, I think, but it's, you know, at the time it was a revelation.
And it was one of the reasons for buying a Nintendo console, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was that it made N64 the multiplayer console, right? Especially because N64 had 4 controller support out the box, as opposed to PlayStation, you had to buy a weird like
Yeah, you
tap
did. You
thing to do. So yeah.
So, are there any other kind of standout, whether they be licensed games or just
Yeah.
kind of third party
I would
games?
say indie games in the modern era are really defined by Nintendo because of the Switch. So 2 that stand out for me are Celeste and Hades. They are 2 of my favorite Switch games, and I think like are 2 of the best independent games ever made.
Yeah.
So
Do you know
those
the
are huge ones for
the
me.
funny thing on that? I actually do agree with you, but I've gone back and forth on who the indie king is, right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes it feels like Game Pass is the indie king.
Yeah, I mean,
Do
in
you
the
know what I
modern
mean?
era, yes, yeah,
It feels like Game Pass has kind of taken that spot with
yeah,
the Artful Escape and other games like that.
sure,
But Nintendo have, like you said, had some amazing ones, and they've had them before everybody else, right?
yeah,
So
totally. A
so
lot,
they've
you know,
done
if
well
you
with that
want to
stuff.
launch your indie game on console these days, Switch is usually the one where it will sell the
It's
best. You know,
kind of the safe bet, right? It's
it's
kind
the
of the
yeah.
guarantee of
In
success.
some ways, you know, it's still hard. As someone who works in indie game publishing, it is, you know, it's very difficult still to get any kind of visibility from Nintendo's side. They
Oh,
are
of
a,
course. Yeah, yeah.
you know, like you think that they poor communicators generally to the public try to go behind
Everybody
closed doors
else.
and talk to Nintendo. They are, oh man, trying to get any
Yeah.
conversation with them started is a nightmare. But you know, it's still a good place to put your indie game, right? They'll still be champions for it. You know, like one of my favorite games from last year was Eastward. Eastward is an incredible experience that like was perfect on Switch, and there are so many of those for me. Like I put 90 hours into Hades because it was portable, right? And that was like part of
Yeah.
the appeal for me. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I get that for sure. Absolutely get that. So with all that being said, like I said, we've given you 10 games and shouted out a couple more here on this episode. I'd like you to let us know some of your favorite and some of the games that you consider the best from Nintendo over their long history now. Like they've been in this world of video games for so long now that everyone's going to have a different list, right? Because it depends on what your experience with the Nintendo is. Like,
Yeah.
as I was saying, mine is a little bit more modern
Yeah.
because I've come back to Nintendo with the Switch, and in my opinion, the best experiences I've had with Nintendo, a lot of them are on the Switch.
Yeah, totally.
So and someone else might have a different list. So please, yeah, shout out some of your favorite ever Nintendo games in the comments. Let us know. And then yeah, remember that next time MBZ's on in about 4 weeks, we're gonna start ranking Yakuza games.
Look forward to it.
So
Yeah, sounds good.
that'll be interesting. And of course, we'll put links in the description of the YouTube video for you to find MBZ's podcast, and also you can follow him on Twitter. Where is that, MBZ?
You can find me at Lord NBZ on Twitter if you would.
He thinks he's special.
Look, here's the thing. Nobody takes 3-letter names anymore. You know, I can't just put in 3 letters. It doesn't work. So I had to do something, you know, give myself a title.
I mean, he has to now update his Twitter bio because he's part of this podcast as well.
Yeah.
So that's going to be interesting. But yeah, thank you for joining us. Please remember to like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Rate the show on Spotify as well, because that does help us get some more visibility. The more people that rate it, the more we're going to be seen on there, and the more we can find new audiences, right? To have bigger conversations about these things. So please do that. And at some point, I know a few of you have been asking, I am going to look into getting us onto other podcast services as well. But obviously the show is in a bit of a transitional period right now. So just bear with me on that. And maybe I'll ask this man who has his own podcast to help me figure that stuff out.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, please just like, subscribe, all that stuff. Obviously, we live on Eat Sleep Game on YouTube, so that'll be, linked in the Spotify description as well if you're listening over there. And we appreciate you, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.